Okay, so I want to continue my parapsychology, quantum physics thesis or resume, or whichever that particle starts with resume and goes to thesis, or starts with thesis and runs to resume, depending on where this is applied physics, um, into this variable. Okay. Now again, I could easily, I can't really easily, using these references again, I have to run those numbers and check them across a couple boards. I did them again today, and I found that there was actually 64 states in this variable, but there's a way you can count them up. Are they Newtonian? Are you separating that group from them? Does that reference those 5 states or 7 states of that first basis when you rock this A series out across the top, out to where it starts to invert into B first? Or are we saying that, using the C series without those variables, that's where that's starting to go out because 5 plus these 2 and those first 2 calculations start to invert or subtract, and again it gets out of control real fast. It's a little bit easier when you actually use psychology as your fundamental model, because again we always start with 0. We actually have a big bang, and that is about the point in time when the cell starts to divide in the rate that it does, because it starts to divide very clean. One cell in a sperm, that half and half, 2, 4, 12, whatever it does, because we're not a perfectly symmetrical blob, are we? That's this perfectly round geometry, are we? Well, we apply to gravity. There's going to be some drag in some calculations. The DNA strain is going to make a lot of those calculations, and we're talking chemistry, amino acid chains, and just a whole lot of crazy right at this point that it's not exactly a relative for, at the start of this thesis anyways, to become practical. Now it could be. I just choose to go a different route about that, determining a lot of things. Now I said in that last video that we're out here, and it's not necessarily fundamental to start with a general model, because basically you're a dictator and you're making super soldiers or a super society that kind of goes against a lot of those things. But again, you look at quantum physics. Why aren't a lot of if the quantum physics universal field theory or unified field theory is supposed to apply to everything, how come you're not in charge? That's my question to you. You can't. You're gonna tell me you don't have those answers, and what are you doing here? Oh, we're working for them. All right, can't you apply this in a another model? All right. So, anyways, I got that off my chest. Smartest people in the world. Anyways, using some of these models, it's nice to have a spectrum ratio game. So we got bipolar. Bipolar is an average human concept. I mean, it's easy to snap, and sometimes necessary. Sometimes in a survival situation, a normal person has to go 0 to 60, from a mild-mannered human to Superman. That's the reality behind this. Some of these mechanics, and a lot of the times, as a psychologist, they're separating events as if they're the total particle in a wave function. Now, again, you look at some of the stuff on. Go ahead. I was using Facebook yesterday, and there's a lot of wave functions based in. It was about pi being a derivative of 5, and how this works, and you have this wave function spectrum, and it gets out of control real fast. It may, for all I know, reference the Big Bang, but again, now they're saying the Big Bang really isn't a thing. But we apply that to actually say, well, at this moment, I'm diagnosing you as that, and I got to get you as a rabbit to understand that you're bipolar, you're schizophrenic, you're listening to those variables. Schizophrenia is actually a very normal aspect of human life. You ever hear yourself cranking the numbers? In a way, that's a voice that's not really there. It's you thinking about what your girlfriend, brother, sister, mother, uncle's cousin may think or say. And in form of that particle wave function, on the spectrum of out of control, and how quantum physics is just as schizophrenic and bipolar by their particles, and what makes them up is a string, how many bosons or fermions make that up to determine how much mass it has, and then all that other elemental stuff, that chemistry and things like that. This is a chemical reaction, essentially. It's very hard to separate these things once that cake's baked, or once you start mixing those ingredients. But it's easy to say, all right, so normalcy, this is just the normal level of what that is, and there's a certain anthrope of that about an idea that could say this is, just basically breaking down the physics of what bipolar is. So you as a person can analyze those spectrums a little bit better. So you're more aware of those particles as they change in front of you into the wave function that is this moment to that moment, and how to stay within those frames. How to criterialize and analyze your level of schizophrenia, because analyzation is just as crazy, just as bipolar on this ratio about what you may understand. But we're trying to base this in a social liberal group, a group that says from A to B, there's a certain standard of how we look at that, and again, in social liberal. Now, I'm not afraid to tell you that. You can know that information, and you may never know anybody, so how are you supposed to better do that? A lot of these cases, they have trouble knowing people. They can't fit in the society they may be dealing with. Not necessarily, and I know it's a killer because they're reputable or not reputable. They're your people. That's where you're going to get a lot of your information from. And sometimes it's impossible to escape that gravity unless I take you out of that and beat you with the ruler here for a little bit, the stick, and that's to say we're going to take you out of that, arrest you, put you on medication for a while, see what happens, test this theory out for a little bit without knowing really the result. Because a lot of these medications, everybody's different, their brain chemistry is different, their fundamental natures of where they're coming from, why we analyze this as why we analyze this. It really takes a bit of direct physics, just me being a general overview for a little bit to help you process out some orders. The order of these functions, how to make it to A to B, with a few more steps, without taking so much extra time that I don't allow you to take, or that I don't allow society to say, hey, don't say anything to them, because don't do that. That's where my authority comes into that point. But basically, I can crank numbers really well, so that's why hopefully you give it to me. But again, bipolar is normal. We're going to put that at the 0 level. And above that, we're going to say, well, we're going to break that down with your physics, or we're going to break down physics to analyze the specific medication that you may need. Because it's all over the place. It's not that this lithium or whatever is necessarily going to fix that. It could be that you have physical conditions that are offsetting some of your body's biochemistry and need to be processed properly against that kind of physical calculation. This is string theory. This is looking at a string like this and trying to base that out down to an average and a tighter line that says here's those 3 spectrums. This is where you need pill, this is average, this is where it's just that regular talking to you every Wednesday, or you call me on a Tuesday anytime you want. Against that, you have to call me that, and I have to make you take medication. It's just the way it is. There's your 5th dimensional, as much as that is an applied model up and down there. A lot of different XY spectrums to determine what that is. And a lot of physics, a lot of quantum physics, classical mechanics, they have a lot of these group states in them. It's algebra, it's a little bit of trigonometry, the Pythagorean theorem, a lot of other variables. And when I use it as a case study to help you break down what's happening in front of you. Again, it's not always practical. I don't always use this model, but here I'm just being very vague. Here's my spectrums. We're starting with atoms and or bosons and fermions, and we're building some strings to connect all of those things to the atoms and the nucleuses, and how they reference all the points in the universe where you're just floating around through. Okay, and that could be right here on planet Earth. That's essentially their model of the Big Bang, but they'll tell you it doesn't really exist anymore. The universe always was and always will be. That idea, no matter how diagnosed or how proper the mechanics of that are, can change in a heartbeat given the environment that changes around it. The real world society that says everything I just taught you here, throw it out the window. We're not saying that happens. You got to call me first at this point if you're, anyways. I talked about that. I said that before we, anyways. All of them have that level of a spectrum, and all of them determine that level, and you kind of have to run them against yourself. You kind of have to know, well, again, it's really hard to diagnose people with serious conditions, or at that premium level have been born into a system and are out here and try to process it like that. Usually we're just dealing with the physics of Can you stand here? What are they called? They're called, my aunt used to have them. And I can't really tell whether they're birth effects or physical at normal age range that, some developmental process in the dividing of the cell there didn't go wrong. Some terms inside of that group that have multiple spectrums, that can apply with the same exact model as different systems, but all have the same characteristics of an analyzation process, just to name it, just to give it, it's this long, so that references the particle, that gives it an abruptly long sequence of reciprocating terms. And that's Erode's conjecture again. One I use a lot. It's a STEM problem that I use specifically, and it's worth the time. I want you to think about where you're standing right here as a normal person. I want you to go against that wall and then come back to yourself. Where you started, I was here before I knew that, and I'm looking at that wall now. The aspect of quantum physics is actually my home life while growing a marijuana garden, or my home life against going to work every day, why I choose to do a lot of different variables on those things to find better fulfillment in myself, fill out all the grid chart to make it more of an enriched element as a person. It's supposed to help you find fulfillment, but in some regards, and I don't bullshit this, it can push you over the edge. Look at all the frames you're filling out. Sometimes it's this one, this one, this one, this one, and you got 80 million of them going off, and there's no way to determine that you filled out all this information correctly or to the proper order for your given circumstances. If you get arrested, I guess there you go. You'd know that you missed something along the line. So, anyways, to these ideas. Again, I just want to reference how they have so many multiple spectrums on a thing, and as soon as you start to measure it, it comes off wrong. Gravity is an equation that I know applies to you, but the answer motion 1 and motion 2, given that wavelength, given how many points are really in there between smaller motions, are points that are unmeasurable. It could be just 3 angles. Bang, bang, bang with the Hadron Collider. How you received some person, how it could have went one way or the other, how it'll go next time. Well, there's a lot of diversified inconsistency in that chart, or the quadrants of how you have to calculate that thing and make it come off on a piece of paper. Again, I said it earlier in one of my videos about how Newton and Einstein and Planck and Tesla, these guys they cheat the system. It's about survival. In their game, they had to stick it out. They had to come out on top of this, and sometimes you have to lie about this. You have to cut it off at a certain point, which may seem like the right answer, but because we have all that, somebody already did it. Now you have to pack it in there with quantum physics and chase this rabbit with a whole bunch more calculations, and that's not necessarily best for society. Just again, one of my personal pet peeves with some of this department, and again, this is my correcting that variable. Again, I correct it in a way that hopefully anybody can apply to this, but it's not really practical to build off of it. We already have the base. Now we're just filling out the chart. And that's what everybody else is doing. You can't necessarily call it a new field of study. It's still psychology. It's not parapsychology, quantum physics. This is what psychology always done. This is what physics always done. It's always what mechanics did. Mechanics, every time they fix something, they're building a window this much that did something very specific, just like the process that built the machine they're working on. Sometimes it's this bolt or this bolt or that bolt. Sometimes in a series of doing that thing 20 different times, or having maintenance on that, maintaining that variable, managerial, being the man over that thing. Woman, I don't care. I'm not too particular. I usually give anybody the benefit of the doubt unless they have some serious conditions, and I usually base that not necessarily around what I believe, but what I try to assume is practical around them. What are you good at? And you got some serious disorders. Well, I can teach you the physics behind that, but that doesn't mean you're going to process it. I still see you watching all kinds of crazy stuff on YouTube that doesn't really apply to what you do. You're not using your time correctly, and even if you did, can you physically do the job? It's tough. It's a very, very tough type of study. Catch you on the next one.